So it's great to be here. My story is kind of the story of what happens when the Holy Spirit sort of descends down from heaven and kind of puts an idea in someone's head, kind of Leonardo DiCaprio style, right? That is so powerful that it changed my life. Basically, I've been sort of obsessed with solving systemic poverty since middle school, right? And when I got this idea, the idea led me to go to law school so I could found a legal services group. So, right after I got married, this is me and my wife, we sort of packed everything we owned into a Civic, drove across the country, drove across the Golden Gate Bridge, took this photo, and found this little apartment. It was like 100 square feet, 110 square feet in San Francisco. And it was so small that we could only fit a twin bed in it, right? So we shared this twin bed for 4 years as I went through law school and worked to open this legal services center. And after I took the bar, so we're sitting in this apartment, if I had sort of more self-awareness, I would have realized how crazy it all sounds. Because I had no funding, I didn't know anybody with any reasonable amount of disposable income. I had no experience in management, no experience in fundraising, and had never practiced law. But I told my wife, I said, I am called to create the country's first system of universal access to legal help. And she says, it sounds great. I go out and I start, really vision casting, trying to raise money. I must talk to 100, 200 people. I think of everyone, I think I got one yes, right? I got $100. But I wouldn't give up, And so I went to about 300 local businesses and I got them to donate excess inventory. And then I arranged an auction, sold all of that, and that's how I made our first $8,000, which was the seed capital for the nonprofit. And we opened in January 2013, 2 weeks after I got my license. One of our first clients was Michelle. So Michelle had lived in Bayview, San Francisco her whole life, was currently living in public housing, and she had a couple issues. One, she hadn't had heating for 2 years. So she's living in this home, her heater stopped working, it's filled with carbon, and she had made complaints to the housing authority and they had refused to fix it. Two, it's a 1-bedroom, she's living there with her grandchildren, and in 2 of the 3 rooms there's black mold growing. And they actually got very sick, they were hospitalized, but despite this, and the housing authority refused to remediate the mold. Okay, but the real big issue was she had raw sewage that would backfill and fill her tub, and also fill her toilet, and it prevented her from using her bathroom. So she would have to relieve herself in a bucket, shower in the kitchen sink. This went on for many months, about 9 months. They refused to fix that too. And if you're wondering, yes, this is all illegal, we have laws against this. Michelle went to 3 or 4 agencies across the city, both nonprofit government agencies, asked for help. They all turned her away. And finally, she saw our little street sign and walked in, and we took her case. We filed an administrative complaint with the housing authority. They were so unused to dealing with administrative complaints. They literally showed up to 5 hearings in a row, unprepared, and asked for a continuance. Because they said they didn't have time to read her file, or they couldn't find her file, or the file was locked and nobody had the key. And after the 5th hearing, they lose the case, they are ordered to pay damages, they pay damages, and they repair everything within a week. So we opened, again, in the back of the Salvation Army. They let me use the space for about $50 a month. which was about as much as I could afford. With just the kind of sign, Baby Hunters Point Community Legal, we were immediately overwhelmed with requests for help from people like Michelle. People that had good cases that had been turned away from multiple places, that were unable to get help. And I want to be clear, it's not that there was help available and they just couldn't find it. There was no help. So for every person I talked to, I kind of knew that if I didn't help them personally, they would not get help. They would not solve their problem. And obviously that's a difficult situation to be in personally. I don't think I could have made it through without God. It kind of felt like building the first well in the middle of a desert, and just being surrounded by the need. Honestly, I worked so hard that I even got myself in the emergency room. I wouldn't give up. I kept going. So 2 years in, a client named Claudia walks in. So Claudia had been in this abusive relationship. She had been assaulted about twice a week from her husband. She had 2 kids also. She was even hospitalized once because of the assault. None of that mattered though. One day her husband calls the cops, says my wife has hit me. They arrest her. She spends 5 nights in jail. She's not charged, so she doesn't get a public defender, but she is released and given a civil restraining order that prevents her from going home. It also prevents her from getting any money, from seeing her children, from getting any clothing. So she ends up homeless in San Francisco, right? And she's got this trial coming up on whether or not she'll be allowed back in her home. She goes to 5 agencies around the city, and they all turn her away. She saw the sign, walked in. We immediately took her case. We did a 3-day trial. We got her back in the home. We got her husband out of the home. We got her sole custody of the children. We got her child support, and we got her a divorce, even though her husband had tried to hide the community assets. And this was all done for a fraction of what homeless services cost. She transitioned back into stable full-time employment after that. So, funding was really tough. So this is me. I think this is our 3rd or 4th gala. Every week I would be praying for enough money to pay our staff for 2 weeks from that point, right? Because we almost never had more than 2 weeks of cash. The budget was growing very fast. We had triple growth every year in our budget, but we never seemed to have enough cash. And the cash flow issues, there was a couple points where our checking balance fell below $500. But I never missed payroll, thank God. But it was very stressful, and the stress, with money, with staff, with clients, eventually it did get to me. I didn't recognize it at the time, but I did fall into this sort of depression. I was like, for about 1.5 years, I actually didn't sleep through the night. So I would wake up 4 or 5 times every night covered in sweat from night tremors or night terrors. And I remember getting very upset because I had so little money that I couldn't even afford to get counseling or therapy for this. And I was upset because it's like I've spent my whole life trying to help people and I can't even afford to get therapy. But I swallowed my pride and I went to my church and they funded me to get therapy, which I'm very thankful for. And over time, actually things got a lot better. And I have been sleeping through the night, so thank you. Around our 5th year, a client named Cheyenne comes in. So Cheyenne's issue was she also had been in this abusive relationship, resulting in a different legal problem. Her boyfriend would take her car, right, and go joyriding, and if she complained about this, he would assault her. So one day he takes the car, goes joyriding, runs into a trunk runs into a pole falls over. The insurance company for the truck then sues her for the damages. But she never gets notice of it because the process server who's supposed to serve her with the lawsuit never serves her. In fact, lies about serving her in his court filings. So she never knew about the lawsuit until 5 years later when her license is suspended. So she, license suspension, she calls the DMV. They're like, "Why?" She's like, "Why is my license suspended?" And they say you have a $70,000 judgment against you. She goes on Facebook. She's like, "This is so unfair. How was I even supposed to know about this?" Her not only was her license suspended, but her bank account was seized. Had a lien placed on it, so she lost her savings. Her wages were garnished. And she needs her car actually for her work. So she was just driving without a license in order to keep her job. Hoping she wouldn't get pulled over, right? So fortunately, we were able to file a motion to reopen the case by proving that she never been properly served. And then it took a few months. And then once the case was reopened, we were able to litigate it, prove that she hadn't given permission to use the car, and get the entire judgment dismissed and get her license reinstated. And, again, it's like, why would we as a society expect that people are able to handle these issues on their own, right? So I went and looked it up. I thought, this is really, really messed up. How bad is the U.S., right? I'm surrounded by need. So I went on the sort of World Justice Project, and I looked up, how does the U.S. rank, this was in 2014, how does the U.S. rank in terms of access to civil justice? So, in other words, if Cheyenne or Claudia or Michelle lived in another country, how easy would it be for them to get help? And what I found was every dark-colored country on this map is ranked better than the U.S. in access to civil justice. So it's easier if you're in Nigeria and low income to get help than it is if you're in the United States. And actually, we were 64th in the world when I looked this up in 2014. When we looked this up this year, we actually had fallen to 101st in the world, which means now we are like roughly half of all developing countries. It's easier to get legal help. So you would be forgiven if you believed that for these kinds of legal issues, the Constitution guaranteed legal representation. A lot of people believe that. The way to think about it is there's a lot of law, right? And there's this very small chunk of law called criminal law. And in criminal law, the problem is the law itself. The law is punitive and it's discriminatorily enforced, but you are guaranteed an attorney. Then there's all this stuff called civil law, right? And that's stuff like housing law, consumer law, family law, elder law, immigration law, employment law, and you are not guaranteed an attorney. And if you cannot afford an attorney, you will not get an attorney. And if you do not get an attorney, you are roughly, studies say, between 5 and 6 times less likely to win your case on the same facts. So we started doing some research. I brought together this team of data scientists, and we started to understand, what was the secondary effect of not having legal aid? What we found, so we kind of modeled the location of every legal aid attorney in the country by county, and then we built a sort of a random forest tree model to estimate its impact on different kinds of social issues. So, for example, we found that one legal aid attorney has 8 times the influence on reducing property crime as one police officer did. And again, it's because legal aid creates economic security, means less people are less likely to engage in property crime. Another study, so we actually did this was done in 2000s, but found that legal aid is the only service found to reduce the rate of domestic violence in the community. So they studied counseling, batterers programs, hotlines, shelters, etc. Prosecutorial services. They found legal aid was the only one statistically likely to change rates of domestic violence. We did another study, which is publication pending, found that legal aid has about the same effect on homelessness, sort of as a sort of variable importance, as affordable housing does. So in other words, a city without affordable housing, all things being equal, would have about as much homelessness as a city without legal aid. We took our we did a social return on investment analysis. We determined for every dollar we spent, we generated about $6.63 in financial benefits for clients, and deterred up to $14.75 in illegal activity. And that this ROI was about 4 times stronger than any other kind of human service that used the same methodology. So I took all of this data and I went to the city, and all these stories too. And I met with the Board of Supervisors and the Mayor's Budget Office and the Mayor's Policy Office and the Department of Housing and Community Development. And I tried to, kind of pitch what we're doing. And I framed it as this paradox. So if you look, this is OECD data. If you kind of add up all public and private spending in the US on social expenditures, so either in-kind services or direct cash transfers or tax credits, you add them up and kind of display that as a percentage of GDP, you will find that the US spends more on social expenditures than any other country in the world, except for France. We are spending more than Sweden, we are spending more than Norway, we are spending more than the UK. But our money seems to have very little effect. Because we have the second highest poverty rate among all developed countries. So why is it, and what's true of the US is doubly true in San Francisco, right? Why is it that we seem to spend so much and get such poor outcomes for it? And what I said to the city, it's because you're missing the most important, most cost-effective sort of solution to poverty, which is legal aid. And if you invest in us, we can make San Francisco the first city in the country with universal access to legal help by creating 6 kind of community centers around the city, and then becoming a model for national replication. And so I pitched this, and the city in early May released what they were going to fund this year, and we weren't on it. And I said, well, we just got to keep trying. So we set up more meetings with the supervisors, and a week and a half later they released the next list, the revised list of what they were going to fund, and we also weren't on it. So then the day the budget was due, I was like, you know what? I told my team, I said, we just got to go to City Hall. So we went down to City Hall, and I just sat on the bench and just tried to talk to as many people as possible. And so we went at 10 a.m. and sitting there just chatting, and they released the next list of what's going to get funded, and we weren't on that one either. And I just started getting really depressed, but I just kept working, I wouldn't give up. And around 5 o'clock, they released the next list, and we're not on that list either. And I'm just kind of crying in the corner. And finally, around 9 o'clock, they released the next list, and we're not on that one either. But they did say, let's talk privately, right? So apparently, the Board of Supervisors had gotten together with the mayor and had made what's called a budget modification, and put in an additional $1.3 million for universal access to legal services. We're working on rapidly expanding. We're building 2 more community centers out in the next 2 months, doubling the staff, so that, and with this expansion, we'll be covering about 30% of the low-income population of the city. And this is, again, the first phase in our citywide scale plan. We hope within 2 years we'll be citywide, and we can then begin our replication efforts outside of the city. So, 10 years after becoming possessed by this idea, I now believe more than ever that, you know, what's the root cause of poverty in America is not a lack of funding, and it's not a lack of laws. It's an inability of our most marginalized, low-income people of color in the United States, their inability to enforce those laws. And the reason why they can't is because we don't fund legal aid, and because we don't fund it, people can take advantage of them. And the result of that is they are treated differently than me and you in everything from housing to employment to consumer relations. And that ultimately, poverty is caused by how we treat our neighbors and allow them to be treated. So, you know, obviously we're not going to change this overnight, but it's going to take all of us to work to make the law belong to all of us so that it is enforceable by all of us. So, thank you.